The evening is sponsored by several groups, including Migrante Ontario, No One Is Illegal, the Socialist Caucus of QP Ontario, and the Socialist Project Labour Committee, as well as, I mentioned, Labour for Palestine. And some of you will know, in fact, that there is an important conference here in Toronto that follows immediately after the CLC convention, which is a conference looking at labor solidarity in relation to Palestine. Speaking of Labour for Palestine, acknowledge a most important and distinguished guest in our audience today, and that's Manuel Abdullah from the PCFTU. Greetings of solidarity and welcome to this evening's forum to Manuel, and thank you for coming. We also would like to acknowledge the Canadian Union of Postal Workers and thank them for providing their caucus room to us to have this event this evening. And we also salute them warmly for their recent path-breaking national resolution on Palestine, calling for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And I'll just try to briefly talk a bit about the process whereby this panel came together. It started two or three months ago, actually, at the initiative of some people in this room, including Catherine Nassofsky, who just spoke. Some of us in a variety of different kinds of, on the left of a variety of different kinds of unions in the city, also got together with sisters and brothers in para-labor formations, organizations crucially organizing people who in many cases are denied formal access to trade union structures, either because of their immigration status or citizenship status or other kinds of means. And we wanted to get some kind of conversations going about what might be done to revivify the labor movement. And we had this conversation partly, on the eve of the CLC, but thinking beyond the CLC as well. So we looked at a number of different issues, including what are some of the structural problems with the CLC that prevent the kind of movement that we'd like to see, the issues with affiliates, what's been the history, past and present, with various kinds of left and activist orientations and interventions at the CLC. And we also looked at some of the issues that we thought were not being well addressed in our broad labor movements. So it's with that in mind that we thought about what might be the kinds of issues that we could take up in a panel like this. We spent a lot of brainstorming. We were a group initially of a couple of dozen people who have often networked together in the Toronto context, but I hope that some of the issues that we address have much wider implications for those of you who may be situated in very different kinds of places than the Toronto scene. So we talked in our conversations about a wide variety of issues that we saw facing the labor movement, but broadly there were four things that we wanted to try to address this evening, and our four speakers in different ways are oriented to looking at those kinds of questions. So I'll just name what some of them are, and then I'll briefly introduce our speakers and the order in which they will speak. Certainly, crucially, we wanted from the beginning to highlight the many extremely important Indigenous struggles going on within the territory now called Ontario. All parts of the province right now are implicated in really crucial Indigenous struggles. And it also not escaped notice that figures like Sean Brant, for example, were being hammered in the press and everywhere for carrying out actions that the labor movement historically had used as particular kinds of weapons, and no longer does, in fact. So we wanted to think about those kinds of links as well as many others. So that was one key starting place, an important one to highlight, given also the important encampment that is happening right now at Queen's Park. So that was one key starting point. We also, as I indicated earlier when I talked about our organizing process, really wanted to highlight all of those who are excluded from the House of Labor through particular kinds of practices linked to citizenship, nationality, and racialization, and to figure out what kinds of organizing strategies can come from that place and why the labor movement is kind of continually unable to address that effectively. So that was a kind of second area that was very important to us in a broad way. We also wanted to look at the question of international solidarity and new ways to practice that. And that's coming in part out of the experience of some of us with the Labor for Palestine experience and with the experience within CUPE of educating on a worker-to-worker model around the question of Palestine, but also in relation to other international issues and in fact rethinking the very way international solidarity has been conceived by the mainstream labor movement as some kind of thing that's in fact tacked onto what is often an extremely nationalist labor movement whose primary focus is on saving national jobs, and other kinds of issues then cannot be integrated within that kind of model. Finally, we also did want to look at what is going on in the arena of collective bargaining and over the gradual erosion of so many key rights, including the right to strike, and some of the implications of the way the debate over the CAW has affected all of the House of Labor and beyond. So we wanted, crucially, to have a look at many of those classic issues which have been central to the way the labor movement organizes itself and thinks about collective bargaining and the right to strike. Those were the themes that we highlighted, though we also talked about many others, but we knew we couldn't include all of them. There were many crucial issues. So I will just now turn to briefly talking about, I'm not sure whether to introduce each speaker before she or he speaks or introduce everyone as a group, but maybe I'll just speak about the order in which people are going to speak. The first speaker will be Stephanie Good, who's going to be talking about the struggle at Tyendinaga and the whole question of direct action against colonialism. She will be the first speaker. The second speaker is Iliam Borbano, who's sitting just to the left of Stephanie Good, who will be talking about ways to revision and rethink the question of international solidarity. The next speaker will be Marco Luciano, who's sitting just to the left of me, who's going to be looking at mobilization and organizing beyond the conventional House of Labor in terms of migrant standpoints and the challenges to organizing there. And the final speaker will be Herman Rosenfeld, who will be looking at the whole question of concessions, the right to strike, and collective bargaining. So maybe what I'll do is I'll introduce each speaker just before they speak, and so I'll just say a fast word about Steph, and then we will start. Each speaker will speak for about, I think, 10 to 15 minutes, and then we hope to have a really wide-ranging discussion. So Stephanie Good is the first speaker, and she's with the Tyendinaga Support Committee. Stephanie is a well-known activist in Toronto circles and has been very committed to a variety of questions. But today she's going to be speaking from her involvement in the Tyendinaga Support Committee, which has been formed to deal with issues around the charges that Sean Brandt is currently facing, and the issue of stolen land in relation to the Mohawks of Tyendinaga. So, Stephanie, do you want to begin?